Hey ExJW, thanks again for stopping by. If you're new to the channel, my name is Riley and I am a former Jehovah's Witness. And today I have another email to read for you. I don't have permission to use the sender's name, so I'll be referring to them by the initial A. Let's see what A has to say. Hi Riley, I just wanted to say thank you for making all the ExJW videos. I found them really helpful. You mentioned other people contacting you with their stories. Well, here's mine. I'm sorry it's a bit long. If you want to read it out or part of it at any time, I don't mind. I'm not confident enough to make my own videos yet, and it helps just to write things down. I was born into the Jehovah's Witnesses and always knew my JW friends and cousins were different from the other kids at primary school. We had to leave the assembly hall during hymns. We couldn't participate in Easter and Christmas celebrations, and didn't really know many people outside the faith. I started to wake up at a very young age. I was about 8 or 9 when I asked my mother if I could stay at a non-JW friend's house overnight. She told me that I had to limit my interaction with worldly children and that I'd be better off staying at a cousin's house if I wanted to spend more time with friends. When I asked why, the answer stuck so firmly in my mind that I remember it now as a 41-year-old as if it were yesterday. There's no point in making friends with worldly children because they will all die at Armageddon. I had been shown terrifying illustrations of Armageddon in the past, images of people running, cowering, and dying, but I had never put this together with people I knew. I went on to ask if it included all children and babies, and the reply was yes. They'll all die because of their parents' mistakes. We thought Armageddon was going to arrive before your brother had to start primary school, but it won't be long now, my mother said. My brother was in the process of leaving secondary school. I suddenly realized just how long they had been waiting. They seemed to be looking forward to it, but it sounded so horrible that I began to question why good people could hope for something so bad to happen. Over time, I started to question things more and more, and ended up being told to stop asking awkward questions. At one point, my brother told me that if I kept questioning the truth, that I would let demons into the house. By the time I reached 14 years old, I no longer believed any part of it and wanted out, but had no idea how. I spent a year going back and forth to meetings and Bible study groups, being pushed harder and harder to start giving more answers over the microphone at meetings and to give a short talk to a small part of the congregation in the little back room of the Kingdom Hall. Every time I went to the Kingdom Hall, the same elder would ask me if I was going to give a talk yet. Eventually, I gave in and agreed. The day of my talk was my lowest point. Not only was I a small, lonely and timid child, but I was being horrifically bullied physically and mentally at school, and now I had a huge weight put on me to speak in front of people about a subject I didn't believe a word of. I was terrified, genuinely terrified. By the time I began to give my talk, I was shaking, feeling like I was going to pass out and couldn't even hear myself talk. I just got through it and didn't remember much of what I said. I was congratulated by lots of happy brothers and sisters afterwards, and for a moment it felt good. Then someone mentioned my next talk, and I knew this was time to leave. I couldn't do that again. Either I was going to mentally fall apart or take some control, no matter the consequences. When I was still just 15 years old, I tried to think of a way to leave. Unfortunately, only one option stood out, and that was suicide. I felt so vulnerable and so weak that I couldn't deal with it anymore and took a whole load of pills. Fortunately, I didn't take enough, just enough to make me ill and get the attention of my mother, who already knew something was wrong. So sad. My mother told me that I could go a few weeks without attending any meetings and see how it goes. Over the next few months, she kept asking me to go back. My older brother pushed as well, giving me looks of disappointment each time I said no. Getting me back to the meetings seemed to be more important than my welfare. They had forgotten how bad it had got, and we never spoke of the pills incident again. After a while, I was told I had to start going back to school regularly and the meetings. I refused point blank, no arguing. I managed to get a job and start college while I was still 15 years old. I finished my education in an adult college class and passed many qualifications and learned a career by the time I was 17. I buried myself so deep into study and work that I never had time to stop for arguments about religion. At 17 years old, I moved out. I worked hard, I partied hard, and I probably made a few mistakes, but I fought with every fibre of my being to get out of the JWs and swore never to let them back in my life. The only time they tried was at my grandmother's funeral when I was around 23 years old. I was given some time at the funeral to be with my own thoughts when the same elder that had always pushed me to give talks approached me and started asking me if I had given any thought to come back. I told him no, and your timing is very inappropriate. My aunt then tried the same conversation minutes later, and I was so angry that I decided at that point to cut the family off. I realized that even talking to JWs made me feel weak and vulnerable again, and that I had a more deep-rooted problem than I had realized. Now I'm 41, and I still struggle on a daily basis to make friends and to talk to people. I avoid JW family if at all possible, as the subject is so painful. I always kept in touch with my father, who secretly always wanted to leave, but my mother has threatened to divorce him if he does. Sadly, even my father stopped all contact with me about 3 weeks ago. I got married a week ago, and as it's a same-sex marriage, I think it may have been too much for my parents to deal with. At the wedding, my side of the guests had no one there, which was a little gutting. But I have a new family now, even bigger than before, with lots of brothers and sisters-in-law, a mother and father-in-law who I get on very well with, and a brilliant husband who supports me in every way, even my slightly quirky awkwardness in social situations. He gets the whole messed up JW thing, and it hasn't been a problem for us to discuss. Looking back, I'm a little bitter about having to drag myself out of this religion at 15 years old. There was no one to support me or advise me. I had to do it all myself. My impression of the Jehovah's Witness faith now is that it's wrapped in an artificial, warm, fuzzy blanket of love and family. Stay inside and you'll survive with us. Leave and you'll be alone in the cold. But it doesn't have to be that way. It was hard work, but I'd rather be out of the JWs, free to live a life with my own decisions, and a family that can communicate about anything, because even in the tough times, at least it's real. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that really emotional story with us. The very first thing that I want to say is congratulations on your recent marriage. You sound really happy, and I'm very, very pleased for you. There are some parts of your story that deeply resonated with me, particularly the parts about your childhood. I remember as a child asking about whether or not children and babies would die at Armageddon, and I was given a response that was very similar to the response you received from your mother, which is, yes, they will all die. But I was also told that if Jehovah didn't kill children and babies, then they would grow up and be just as bad as their parents. The only way that reasoning would make sense is if Jehovah's Witnesses believed in predestination and fate and your life path being set out for you in advance. But as we know, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in that. They often quote the scripture, "A thief was not born a thief." So to condemn a baby to exactly the same life course as their so-called wicked parents just makes no sense. It makes no sense logically, and it makes no sense doctrinally. I was also sorry to hear about your experience of being bullied at school. I went through a similar thing. I was bullied at primary school too by a boy called Anthony Vella, and I'll never forget him. Sadly, he's passed away now. He died at the age of 13 after some misadventure, but he bullied me almost all the way through primary school. And when I would complain to my parents about it, the response that I would get was, well, never mind, soon Armageddon will come and he won't be around anymore. And when I think about it, that was a really horrible thing to say. I mean, bullying is deplorable. Nobody enjoys being bullied, but even a child, despite being a bully, it just doesn't sit right with me to look forward to a child, even one who's a bully, being destroyed in Armageddon. It just doesn't sound right. JWs say things like this all the time and think absolutely nothing of it. Reading about your suicide attempt at the age of 15 was just absolutely heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that you felt so trapped that in your mind suicide was the only way out. I'm just glad that it didn't actually work. I can only imagine the immense pressure that you must have been under with having to live a lie in more ways than one. Firstly, in not believing the religion of your birth and having to a degree pretend that you were a believer. And secondly, with your sexuality as well, having to hide that part of yourself. I can only imagine the toll that it took on you mentally and emotionally. And, I deeply sympathize with your situation as it was then. You mentioned that for a time you were permitted to stay at home away from the meetings for a while until you recovered. And you said that it was as if your family cared more about you going back to the meeting than they did about your actual well-being. That resonated with me as well because I've had similar experiences also. Being a Jehovah's Witness is like being a machine. You're required to surrender your humanity, how you feel, either physically, mentally, or emotionally, takes a complete backseat, and it's all about what you have to do, what you can do, what you're able to do. You're not a human being, you're a human doing. It's just no way to live at all. It's not even living, it's just existing and functioning. But I applaud you for doing what you had to do and taking the steps that you did to remove yourself from that situation, especially at such a young age. It shows a huge amount of focus and determination on your part, and I really do admire you for that. You mentioned also the incident at your grandmother's funeral and how that affected you and it made you feel vulnerable and weak. And after that, you realized that your issues were much more deeply rooted than you had previously realized. In response to that, I would strongly advise you to seek therapy if you haven't already done so. I would advise anyone leaving a high control group or a high control religion to seek therapy, whether they had a traumatic experience in that group or religion or not. And on that point of therapy, I will leave some links in the description of this video to some resources that can help. I'm so sorry that you didn't have any of your family representing you at your wedding. That must have been extremely heartbreaking for you, especially at an occasion like a wedding. Why don't people get married in private? It's because that is an occasion that you want to share with other people and celebrate with other people. And the fact that you didn't have your family there with you to do that is really sad, and I'm so very sorry. When a person studies the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses and eventually convert to the religion and progress to baptism, they're always advised to cut ties with so-called worldly friends and worldly family members, even close family members. As a consolation for that, they're always told that anyone you lose in the world when you come into the truth will be replaced. You'll have a new family in the congregation, new brothers and sisters, new parents. That's what they're all told. But as you actually put it at the end of your email, none of that is real. If love is conditional, it's not real. There is no world in which it makes sense that your love for somebody should depend on believing the same thing. At least no world that I want to live in. And in my own personal experience, the opposite of what Jehovah's Witnesses tell new converts has been true in my life. I have gained friends and family both friends who I consider family and also blood relatives that I've gained since leaving this organization. And their love for me thus far has been unconditional. And I'm so happy, and it really warms my heart to hear that you have had the same experience. Thanks again for sharing your story with me and with my viewers, and I wish you all the best. That's it for this email. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to share your story with me yourself, please feel free to email me at jexit_2020@outlook.com. Thanks again for watching. Please proceed to the Jexit in an orderly fashion, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching to the very end of the video. If you haven't already done so, please like, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. If you like my work and want to help me continue doing it, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Jexit_2020. And with that, I'd like to sincerely thank these very special patrons who make these videos possible.